Me and Emily, we're going to be talking about all kinds of labs. We're so excited because Emily is an expert out there. Every time I talk to her, I learn something new. And we're always going back and forth because she loves hormones, women's health, fertility. There's so many things that I learned from her, and I'm really just super excited because there's some tests she runs that I don't run as much of, and vice versa. So we're going to dive into all of them all at once here. So, Emily, tell everybody a little bit about yourself that don't know who you are.
Well, I'm a little like I've got this screen here for Facebook, this screen here for Instagram. So I'm just going to kind of bounce back and forth between the two. But I am a nutritionist based out of Denton, Texas. Work with predominantly women, probably about 95% of my practice is women, with a big focus on root cause. Been in this space for about 3 to 4 years. Dr. Jaban and I connected at a conference. Our approach to helping people get well is very, very, very similar. And so excited to be here. I appreciate you reaching out.
Well, Emily, I want to just start out with, since it's lab testing, what is your absolute number one most effective test that you want on everybody that gets a hold of you?
Definitely a complete blood work panel, CMP, CBC, iron panel, and then a few other key markers that are reflective of the adrenals, thyroid, and various things that can point to, is there something going on at a root cause standpoint?
Okay. So to get in depth, because a lot of the people that follow us tend to want to know details, what is a CBC going to tell you?
Going to be your complete blood count. I know you run it a lot too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, white blood cells, for example, you and I have similar ranges, correct?
Yeah.
5.5, 7.5. Is there a chronic infection? Are we above 8 where it's that acute situation, or is it below that 5, 5.5 where it's been going on for a while, that chronic situation? You can look down then further at those neutrophils, your eosinophils, your lymphocytes, basophils, and detect, is there something going on from a parasite, bacterial, or viral standpoint?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, just today I had somebody coming in and I got to see his labs because his mom wrote them all down for me. And he went from 10 to 9 to 8 to 6 while we've been working together over the last few months. So just watching that, showing infection load going down. And then each type of white blood cell has a purpose. Do you look at that a lot?
White blood cell, yeah. And I'm just looking at Instagram too. They're saying we're echoing bad.
Huh. Don't know exactly what to do to fix that. Is your volume all the way down on your Facebook or on your Instagram?
Instagram, yeah.
Is this any better now, I wonder? No, I can still hear it. Say, because I know I do this all the time, but I don't get any feedback on it.
We'll just end Instagram.
Come back to Instagram here in a little bit.
All right. Don't want to be echoing for our friends on Insta.
All right, so everybody on Facebook, we're going to go ahead and go with that question. And that question was, why do you run a CBC? And then we got all the way down to the white blood cells. And what do you see when you're looking at the different types of white blood cells?
Like neutrophils, lymphocytes, eosinophils, things like that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So neutrophils, I'll often see that it's elevated above 60. So it points to, that potential for some sort of bacterial infection, something going on in the body. And then you look at lymphocytes, it can point to, is there a potential viral infection going on? Is it, elevated, or is it down lower, close to like the 20s, right? And then eosinophils can point to potential for parasites. So anytime I see that kind of, 3, 4, 5 creeping up, I begin thinking, is there some sort of parasitic infection going on?
Yeah. And what do you see in a CMP? Because I know you're looking at each one of those markers, and I have so many people that come in that are looking at, they're like, chloride. What is chloride? Calcium. Why is that high? Why are all these numbers on here? My doctor just says, oh, you're fine. So what do those numbers mean to you?
So your electrolytes, your sodium, your potassium, those can really help point to the health of your adrenals. You can also look at chloride as well. So if sodium's high, potassium's low, or if sodium is low, potassium is high, it can point to a hyper or hypoadrenic state. Chloride, super interesting about that. If you don't have sufficient chloride levels, there could be so much stress in the system that you're peeing out that chloride, so there's less in the blood. So it can really tap to, as Jaban and I speak to often, mitochondrial dysfunction, adrenal fatigue, as people call it, showing up up on just your simple sodium potassium chloride levels, even your carbon dioxide. If it's super low, there's more acidity, dehydrated oxygen exchange. And then you have things like brain fog and opportunistic bacteria able to grow in the gut.
And there's a few other ones I want to throw in there that are on there that I love to talk about, like creatine. When creatine is low, it can actually be a problem too. I saw a kid today with low creatine. That's low muscle tone. That means weakness, low constitution to the body. I talk about that a lot, and it goes along with low cholesterol, low ALT and ASTs, which just shows weakness. And with a lot of the people that I work with in chronic illness, you see a lot of weakness, not just a lot of high markers, because it goes high for a while and then it's just like boom, and the body is weak and tired. But high markers on any of the ones I just mentioned too is also bad, creating inflammation from it. So taking a look at all of these things and understanding what they mean to you is going to be super duper helpful. And those are your most basic blood work, right? Like everybody brings in a CBC and a CMP almost every time they walk in the door because every hospital runs it.
Yeah. And don't you often see, I see it all the time, when diet is super clean, they're eating good, cholesterol and LDL are through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
Almost always. And, doctor says, hey, get off Advil or stop eating fast food. And it honestly has nothing to do with that and everything to do with there could be a potential for a heavy metal or oxidative stress that's elevating those markers.
Yeah, I always tell people high cholesterol means high inflammation. Your body's trying to help you. Cholesterol's job is to increase your ability to make hormones, decrease inflammation. It's just a supportive molecule in your body that you need. So don't fear cholesterol, understand cholesterol.
Yep. And do you see it really low sometimes too when you get towards that malnutrition, lack of absorption, like tapped out, 160 to 190 is kind of where I like to see that. So I'll see people's at 110, 130. They're not even producing hormones at that point.
Yeah, so the National Institutes of Health this year came out and said 160 was ideal. I guess it was last year now. Years are going by fast, especially with all this going on these days. But before that, it was 140 was the marker that I always looked at. And it was actually called an ominous sign of death below 140. So if you have below 140, your body is in a fight that it needs to win because things aren't looking as good as they should.
Right.
So what other blood tests do you want to talk about? You mentioned iron. So what do you see in iron?
Sometimes you'll see the total iron binding capacity, the TIBC, elevated above that 350, also pointing to some sort of oxidative stress in the system. And then sometimes iron will be normal, but ferritin will be super low. And ferritin is your ideal storage of iron. Well, parasites and pathogens tend to eat up those iron stores. So we'll see bottomed out ferritin, and people will go to the doctor and maybe be around 20, feel awful, and they're like, you're fine. And that's borderline iron anemia. So
Mm-hmm.
so that iron can also point to, hey, is there some sort of pathogenic opportunistic bacteria in the gut?
Yeah, and then I don't think you said anything about high ferritin.
Yeah.
High ferritin is inflammation. Chronic inflammation is going to drive ferritin higher, and that's going to tell us a bit about you if you have high ferritin. It also means something called hemochromatosis, which is a situation where you may need to be giving blood to lower the amount of ferritin you have in your body. So there are so many different tests out there that we could choose from to go through on this to show the importance of blood work. But why is blood work important to you? Why is it something that you like to have?
I like blood work because it empowers the client, it empowers the person that is on the other end of that blood work to prevent future disease. There's, ominous markers on blood work, as we touched on, things like albumin and protein and cholesterol, where they can get that yearly check-in on blood work to know, how is my body functioning? What does my thyroid look like? What is my blood sugar? How does my hemoglobin A1C look? That's a marker for pre-diabetic. And so when you start creeping up towards that 5.3, 5.4, 5.5 and beyond, we're not managing blood sugar properly. Things like C-reactive for inflammation, things like homocysteine, things like phosphorus and calcium that can lead to kidney stones. So the reason why I love blood work so much is it kind of shows you from a blood standpoint what is going on, how is our body functioning, and if something comes up as a red flag, you can then be navigated in the right direction for what that might be.
I love it. Yeah, everything you said was amazing. And I want to take it from almost a simpler aspect to say, for me, blood work is easy to translate across to your medical provider. So your primary care, if you go to the hospital and you have history of blood work that we've ran on you and gotten better, it's something that goes right across the board. I love all the fun tests from Cyrex and Great Plains. I love them. I run them. They're useful, but blood work's cheap. It's easy. I mean, shoot, you get a CBC for like $7 and it can tell you all this information for $30. half the time I can throw all this information at somebody, which is just your CBC and CMP, which we talked about. So blood work is cheap, it's reproducible, it's done by everyone. So it's something I love to see at the start, because although I do muscle testing, I do organic acid testing, I do all of these other things, I do assessments. Blood work, if you know how to read it, as you've said so many different ways, that those basic two tests can steer the direction that you're going. They can tell you how to run other testing.
Right.
All right. So what other test do you love to run?
So I always start with blood work, and then once we kind of navigate further into their protocol, what could be going on, I really like the organic acid test. You know, some markers that can point to mitochondria function, some markers that can point to for potential if there's fungus and yeast in the body, or if there's an imbalance in bacteria. Since I do work with so many women, I love the Dutch test. I never run it up front. Just because hormones are all over the map if there is any sort of virus, bacteria, parasite, or mold situation going on. And oftentimes phase 3 of the liver is backed up. So elevated beta glucuronidase levels typically, and that'll back up phase 1 and phase 2. So the Dutch test almost isn't even accurate if you are backed up in phase 3, which is addressed by getting the liver moving, getting the bowels moving, getting the kidneys functioning, eliminating some of that. And then, 3 months down the road, getting a Dutch and seeing where's our progesterone at? Where's our testosterone at? Where's our estrogen? How are our pathways working? How is the methylation performing? What is our melatonin status? How are we doing with that, thing that should be that beautiful cortisol curve? Or are we what I call tired and wired, where we're bottomed out energy in the morning and then it's spiking at night and we're this night owl? And so it gives you a really good indicator from a hormone standpoint what's going on.
I love that. Honestly, yesterday I was talking about testing that you shouldn't run. And I said, Dutch testing is a great test. Don't run it first. So we are on the exact same wavelength with that. Hormones, neurotransmitters, those are two things I just simply don't find a reason to run early on. And it's because they are so dependent on your body actually caring enough and having priority on that first. Whereas when you're sick, it's just not there. So my favorite test, so I'm going to throw that out there to run early on, is an organic acid test. It's from Great Plains Laboratory. The one I like to run, there's multiple companies that run it. Reason I like to run it is it gives me this really wide overview of the body that secondary to the blood can give me so much information. So it's testing energy system, which she already mentioned mitochondria. I love testing mitochondria because it's key for us to understand your energy system. She mentioned all these infections, and if your immune system is knocked down, which is ran by your mitochondria, then it's not going to be working right. If you don't make energy, you don't heal. So there's a lot of information in there on that. You also can catch mold, yeast, and bacteria. And when you have bacteria and yeast, it's telling us a bit about parasites. And beyond that, it shows absorption of nutrients, minerals, and proteins. Not the best test for those things, but it gives you a window into it. So the oat test for me is just a great window into all these pictures that allows me to have an idea of where you are going. And to be honest, at a $300 test, it's not nearly the most expensive, and it does give me a tremendous amount of information. And I know we both like to do some hair mineral tests. So what do you see in a hair mineral test, and why would you run it?
Hair tissue mineral analysis, you send in a hair sample, and I typically run that towards the very end if I feel like I need to, just to see what the body is eliminating. So you'll sometimes see elevations in things like aluminum. How many of us have used, deodorant growing up with aluminum in it? And so that hair tissue mineral analysis is one of the best ways to see if you've got some sort of heavy metal that's being pushed through the surface. And then obviously other heavy metals that can be presented, but also there's a delicate balance between everything on an HTMA. So it's not just what's elevated, but what are the levels in relation to one another.
Yeah, exactly. As I was learning HTMA, I'm like, oh, cool. You're low on calcium, give calcium.
Right.
And then the more you learn about that test, it's like, oh, well, calcium's low, potassium's low, magnesium's low. These are all things. So you're depleted. Your body is adrenally fatigued, most likely. Or your calcium's high and your magnesium's low. Your body's kind of trying to create a shell. So your personality even is going to be rigid. You're going to be pushing back against people. Whereas magnesium, if that's high and calcium's low, you kind of go with the flow. You're not going to resist a lot. And so you can look at this, and based off the minerals coming out, you can almost give like a personality of how that person's working. But you can also see chromium being high, no blood sugar is going to be an issue. or boron or molybdenum being low, and we're likely thinking that the body is toxic somehow. Boron is really correlated, at least in my experience, with uranium or radioactive elements. Molybdenum is great for chemicals. So as I look at this test, it gives me a lot of information. If somebody's super sensitive, I'll run it early on. If they're not, then I'm totally with you, and I run it way down the line when I'm going, okay, is it time to start rebuilding strength into a person? So what tests do you get a lot of and you're just like, why did this get ran? Why is all this money being spent? And for me, I had someone that had 5 stool samples. The kid was 9.
Insane. I mean, stool samples, I can see them all the time. I'm trying to think of other tests I have, but I mean, you get this too. I'll have someone come to me and I'm like, okay, go ahead and upload your previous labs. And I get like the DNA tests and the SpectraCell, which is pretty decent, but they've done it like a billion times and nothing's changed. The doctor's data, the GI maps, I know some of these have some good information, but at what point is 18 uploaded lab tests in the past 2 years and they still are lost with what to do? And a blood work panel was never run, an OAT test was never run. It's just a lot of those generic, hey, is there Lyme in the system? Is there parasites from a stool test? Everything's coming back negative and they feel awful still.
So you said stool samples aren't your favorite. I wanted to add to that infection testing.
Right.
So many people we work with are so chronically ill that they're unable to mount a proper immune reaction, whether that be to the common cold that you get every day so they know it, their immune system's weak. But you can even run your natural killer cells or your IgG cells. You can run CD57. You can run all of these tests that show immune system crashed. But then they walk in from big box clinics with a stack of tests this thick, all testing. Do you have Lyme? Do you have parasites? Do you have Epstein-Barr? All of these immune tests. Do you have food allergy? They're all negative across the board. I'm going, well, of course they're negative. It tells you over here that you don't have an immune system. So why trust those and then say, oh, well, you don't have Lyme, you don't have parasites, you don't have all these things. It must just be in your head. So for me, I don't necessarily like all of the infection testing. I run it, especially because people want it, but it's not my first deal. And I said this, I don't know how many times in the last couple of days, preparing for this live with you, as I was researching and thinking through what tests do I like to run. And I realized with all of that, I like to save people money because, to be quite honest, I'd rather give you a parasite remedy and see if you react. And I'm not talking about a weak one. We're not talking about just giving you oregano only. I'm not talking about one single squirt of biocidin. It's a good product, but I'm not talking about like that. And I've had people do that. Oh, I must not have parasites. I'm talking about give a good month of a high dose of something. And that usually tells me almost more than any infection lab can. What do you think on that?
I mean, I agree. Like if they're reacting to a parasitic formula, then there's probably parasites in the system, regardless of how many tests you get back that are, hey, there's no parasites or infections in the stool sample. And believe it or not, I remember my functional medicine doctor, when he was running these, called the lab. And they even said that there's certain parasite, types that even if they show up positive, they're not going to put them on the results page. And it blew my mind. I'm like, really? Like, there's all these people walking around that are relying on these tests to tell them what might be going on. And it's leaving out so much critical information. So I agree with you. Like, I think, they always say, assume if you have a pulse, you have a parasite. Any sort of signs and symptoms, which can be heightened during the full moon, clenching of the teeth, grinding of the teeth, TMJ, headaches, nausea, bloating, assume you have them and just go through some sort of parasite cleanse, see how you do.
Yeah, I like it. And just to put some more in there, we run parasite testing kind of locally. So if you have a parasite in the United States, there's a few that they run, whereas we're sourcing food from all over the world. So there are thousands of parasites out there that we're probably not testing for. And beyond that, it's a lab tech that is scooping out of your sample, putting it on, looking at it, and they're taught to look for very specific kinds of parasites. It's not a pathologist that has studied 1,000 different kinds of parasites. And even if they did, can they identify them all? And let's assume they can. It's not them doing it. It's a technician doing it. And techs I'm not dogging on them. It's hard to memorize that many. I remember memorizing types of cancer on radiographs in college. 48 was hard enough, much less thousands under a microscope. So it is very difficult to understand the depth at which we look at a stool sample. And then when you look at the research showing, if you poop the day of the sample and put it in there right immediately, it's going to be way different than the sample that you have to mail in and they're looking at 3 days later because of the breakdown of the tissue of those different types of bacteria that oxygen breaks down. So long story short, we both don't like stool samples or a lot of infection testing, although it's very interesting and fun. And I love when I get a positive. A negative doesn't mean no to me.
Right. I agree.
All right. So then what other pieces of labs? We've talked about tests we don't like to run too much. We talked about tests we like to run. We've talked about Dutch and oat. We've gone through several different parts of the primary tests that you get in your blood work. What other things do you run as far as lab tests and what do they tell you? So I guess to make that more specific, after you get your blood work done, your O test done, your Dutch test done, where do you start and why?
So regardless of what shows up, I always start with what I preach on, like foundations and drainage, because regardless of what shows up, if you're coming to see me, if you're coming to see Jaban, there's a reason why. You probably don't feel too good, which means there's something going on. And if you just go and try to kill a bacteria and those foundations and drainage systems aren't working, which what are foundations? Deficiencies, immune regulation, but also are we pooping 2 times a day? Are the kidney and livers functioning properly? Is the lymphatic system adequately working? That's where we start, because things have to be able to move. And there's people that feel amazing just doing 30 to 60 days of drainage work before we ever start anything. So that's always, 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 always with every single person that I get on a consult with, that's where we start.
So poop, liver, lymph, and then figure out what all the labs told us.
Right.
Honestly, anymore, I'm having people start there before I even have the labs back. I'm like, hey, we're going to start doing this. We're going to see what part of the system, if any, is backed up, and then we're going to move on. So we definitely have some similarities there. The only time I don't is when the person tells me I react to everything under the sun, and I go, okay, well, we can wait a little while. We can figure out where to go from after that. Or if they've told me they've already tried a lot of the stuff that I use, because I'm like, okay, well, if you've tried it, then maybe it just wasn't done right. And I want to see where the labs are. How often would you rerun lab tests?
It depends. If I have someone with, let's say, Hashimoto's, and I want to make sure we are able to regulate their thyroid properly, or if there's something on their blood work that's super high, as I call like a key red flag marker, it's more periodic where it might be every 4 to 6 weeks. But typically, I like to run things every 3 months. So blood work every 3 months. I'll typically do a Dutch test around the 4 to 5 month mark, and then you can always rerun things in that period of time. But typically I'm not someone that's like, hey, let's run a lab every month unless you need it, like a thyroid panel where we're working to dose them off of their medication.
Yeah. Well, I'm very similar. I probably am not as organized to run every 3 months sometimes because shoot, by 3 months with some of the chronic people I'm working with, yeah, we're not far enough along that I want to. So a lot of times it's more like 6 months that I'm rerunning some of the blood work and maybe note test yearly. Just because again, I'm so into labs to start, but then after that I go, where can I use your money the best to give you the best results so we can get through this whole situation well and be able to make it? Because the last thing I want to hear from somebody is, I'm just run out of money. That's hard for me to hear because I get attached to you guys. I want to make sure you're doing well and getting through and getting good. And then I check back in with people every 3 to 6 months afterward. I'm like, how you doing? How's your kids? How's the family? But yeah, so there's that. What other questions should we answer tonight?
I think people on Instagram were sad that our thing was echoing. They're like, we can't find it. So
Well, if I'm okay with this. If you are, we can always jump over there after this and go again.
I think people are super sad that they missed it.
No, we'll jump over, maybe go again. Well, I'm
Unless you do.
looking through our questions and seeing if anybody's got questions. Somebody said, what do you recommend for low cholesterol?
I mean, if there's low cholesterol, there is something going on there. And it doesn't have to always be an infection. Like, are you someone that's a super high stress person where you've gone through a period of maybe exercising too much or under eating or restricting your lifestyle in some capacity? Because the body's really smart. It's not going to produce cholesterol, which is the backbone to all steroid hormones. If we're in that stress, you don't need your sex hormones to survive like you do breathing, like you do managing hydration and oxygen. And so it's one of the first things that kind of plummets out. Super, like I see just in super stressful situations that cholesterol is super low. So, identifying that stress in your life.
And if your cholesterol's low, you're probably losing hair.
Yeah.
Your skin's probably dry. Your fingernails are probably brittle. So as you start connecting bodily symptoms to lab work, sometimes you start understanding, okay, if I can get the cholesterol up, I've had women start to grow their hair back. Like all that hair that they've lost over the years starts filling back in. They get a little afro, they get mad at me, then they give me a hug because their hair's growing back in the same 5 minutes. They're just like, you see this? You see this? They're like, you know how annoying this is? Like, yes, I can see that that's there. No, I don't know how annoying it is. There's not a whole lot here. But then they're just like, thank you, my hair's growing back.
Right.
So yeah, low cholesterol though, as far as what I'm going to do is remove the stress from your body. Your bucket's overflowing. So if we can remove that stress, but in the meantime, adrenal support, omegas, make sure you're eating enough. Most low cholesterol people aren't eating enough. So count your calories. Make sure you got at least 10 calories for every pound of body weight. All right, and I've got somebody here that says, to piggyback off of the question above, what if you find somebody who is chronically ill that has normal labs?
Chronically ill with normal labs. I had a client like this probably a few weeks ago. And I feel like her body was in such like a systemic type of state where eosinophils were 0, basos were 0, white blood cells were normal, but she was also on medication. Medication is really good at masking signs and symptoms. So good. It can act like a shield on blood work and make it look normal. Well, we started her on drainage. We started her on things that started moving the needle. Her eosinophils spiked to 20. White blood cells went all over the place. We see elevations in cholesterol and C-reactive because we started getting those floodgates moving. And so I always say, go back to how you feel. If you don't feel good, there's a reason why. So again, foundations, drainage work, get things moving. Assume if there's pathogenic bacteria or viral load, start to address those types of things with a practitioner, because your labs are a great indicator of overall picture, but they can miss things. There can be things sneaky and hiding that are masked by various factors.
Yeah, for sure. I see a lot of people with normal labs that have chronic Lyme and similar findings of what you're talking about. And I do the exact same thing. I go, hey, labs are a tool. They are one way to assess your body. Your symptoms are another. Muscle testing is another. There are so many different types of testing out there that I'm going to listen to you, because you came to me to feel well. You didn't come to me to get your blood work to go to normal, no matter if it's way off or normal. That's not the root cause for somebody coming to me. It's to feel better. Labs getting better is a side effect of correcting the problem. And I use labs to help us get you to feeling better, but it's not because of the labs.
And I'd also ask this person, my follow-up question to that is, what are you considering normal? Because if you're getting labs done and nothing is bolded, those ranges on most labs are based on the sickest of the sick population. And so if we're talking about a blood work standpoint, you could have something that's out of our range you and I look at in a typical medical range, and they feel awful. And so when people are like, oh, my labs were normal, I'm like, let me look at them in a consult. And I mean, I'm doop, out of range, out of range, literally so much. If you look at this paired with this, you can see this picture that, yeah, there's something definitely going on.
Exactly. You're drawing a completely different conclusion, because medical labs, if you're outside of those, oftentimes you're 75% ill, whereas functional range, maybe you're 40% ill. And even at that point, I have seen people pretty close to functional ranges. And then you run a different kind of testing. You run an organic acid testing, or you run a Dutch test, or you run a Cyrex Labs test. You start finding things. But even then, Even then, I've seen normal. I've seen so many kids that are obviously having difficulty with everything looking almost normal. And I've seen people deflate. I mean, I watched one girl in my office just deflate because she thought that I was going to be the guy that was going to read the labs and tell her what was going on. I was like, that's not always the case. Sometimes we just have to get started, and your reactivity is going to tell us the answer. Mm-hmm. So here's the next question. Anemia. What do you do for supplementation?
I usually don't straight up supplement for anemia just because I see it tend to correct itself when you kill pathogens and bugs. However, if I had to talk about two supplements I use, one is from Megafood called Blood Builder, and that will have cofactors that help with that iron storage, also building the blood in general with Chinese medicine and herbs. And then Apex Hemivite tends to be a really good supplement that people test well for low iron. But again, why is the iron low? It also has to be addressed. It could be a hormone standpoint where they're losing too much blood on their menstrual cycle. So then I ask the question of, why is there this really thick uterine lining? Why are we losing so much blood on a monthly basis? So there's a lot of follow-up questions, and I feel like that's where you and I really have to get people to start challenging this field of medicine, because it's not just this, hey, my vitamin D is low. Do I just need to supplement with vitamin D? What is it to fix it? Well, is there something autoimmune? Because then you're burning through your vitamin D stores. Is there a fatty acid deficiency? You won't absorb the vitamin D that you're getting. And so asking follow-up questions, there isn't just a, oh yeah, do this, or everyone in the world would be better at this point.
Exactly. I've had more people than I can count that can get infusions of iron, and it lasts a day, a week, a month at most. And then we go in and fix the leaky gut by getting rid of the parasites.
Right.
Which, by the way, yes, for all of you out there that have leaky gut, you must correct the root of it to fix it. I hear from some people that there's practitioners out there saying you must fix leaky gut before addressing infections. And then my question back is, how do I correct a leaky gut when infections are what cause the leakiness? So although I can do Band-Aids and I can use things that are great, like Hemivite for iron, Repairvite for the gut, I must remove the root cause of it to get better long-term. And then the infusions become obsolete. We don't need them anymore.
Right.
All right, let's see what else do we have on here. Autistic 10-year-old, organic, gluten, soy-free, dairy-free, but I keep getting smells of yeast. Last time we did labs, it showed, and we treated, but I swear I smell them. What's good? If you've got yeast, there's three things. Medication causing it, parasites causing it, metal causing it. You can treat for yeast all day, over and over, and it's going to keep coming back until you get to one of those three root causes or all of them.
I agree. I feel like heavy metals and candida are best friends.
Can you muscle test remotely?
Can you muscle you? Yes, we both do. I mean, my practice is at this point 100% virtual. It's a great tool and something Jaban and I do. And so when someone comes to us and is like, okay, my blood work and OAT test is normal, it's an awesome, awesome, awesome tool that I feel like is moving more and more into the spectrum of how do we address what's going on through bioresonance energy frequency work. It's just an awesome tool to have. So yeah.
It is. Can you review, Emily, the relationship between potassium and chloride for adrenal issues?
So your electrolytes, sodium, potassium, chloride, those three, when used in combination of the ratios of one another, can point to your adrenal status. So when you see, one or the other, a low potassium, higher sodium, and then that chloride that's out of a 100-106 range, it can point to a lot of stress in the system. And then whether your sodium or potassium is high or low, whether it's more of a hyperadrenic state or a I'm tapped out mitochondrial dysfunction, as they call it in our society, adrenal fatigue, where your body's like, I'm done, So oftentimes sodium and potassium can even be normal, and that chloride will be below 100. And that's where you're depleting through the urine all that chloride, so there's less in the blood.
There you guys go. Somebody said, will you teach how to read labs? If so, do you need to have some sort of certification? We both have been talking to each other about putting together something for reading labs to put out there to the public, maybe for practitioners. And do you have it? Do you need a certification? I mean, if you want to work with other people, I think you should have one. It can cover you. You can get malpractice insurance. You understand how to work with people better. I mean, obviously, my Facebook shows it, Dr. Jaban Moore. So it's something that I think people should have at least some background to understand what to look for so we don't hurt people.
What to look for, and also you still have to have a basic understanding. If you're relying just on an oat test and a hair tissue mineral analysis test to, you know, just know those, but you don't know what is a meal that balances blood sugar, you know, how do you balance minerals? Like there's so many things that go into this too, where if we, you know, do, as we've discussed, create this program, it probably will be practitioner based because people are going to need to have a foundation of knowledge of nutrition prior to diving into labs, in my own opinion.
Yeah. What are some common detox reactions for people that start Parasite Cleanse? And to add on to that, another question that came with it, if one drop of biocidin causes a huge list of Herx reactions, what does that tell you?
We'll go backwards on those questions. If one drop causes it, toxicity bucket is way too full. That one drop is the straw that's breaking the camel's back. And that at that point, it's, you know, step away from the biocidin and work on drainage again. You know, making sure, again, you're going to the bathroom 2 times a day, you're hydrating with good water, you are making sure that that liver and kidney is supported. And if it's not through supplements, things like castor oil packs, which I know some people even react to that. I know people that react to even dry brushing. So what is something you can tolerate and then slowly increase over time? Because if biocidin is causing a reaction, it is a straw that's breaking the camel's back. So it's just go back to step A before trying to kill bacteria. And then what was the other question?
What are some common detox reactions to
Oh,
parasite
there's
cleansing?
so many. There's so many, and everyone's is different. Nausea, headaches, itchiness, skin reactions, frequent urination, alternating constipation, diarrhea, bloating, bags under the eyes, ringing in the ears. Oh my gosh, eye floaters. I'm just trying to think of things that people come to me with all the time. Fatigue. I mean, really, really, really severe fatigue. Pretty much anything that you have going into your protocol as you're like, hey, these things bug me, they'll sometimes get worse. Weight gain. People will hold on to water. Solution to pollution is dilution. So if you're, you know, starting to kill things off like parasites, your body swells. It's a healing mechanism. Brain fog is a big one, or migraines, headaches. You know, there's so many reactions, and it's not a bad thing. It just means that your body's doing what it should. It's not very fun, but it's kind of part of the process.
Yeah. The easiest ones to say, flu-like symptoms, feeling hungover, or literally whatever you told me that you wanted to fix when you came in got worse. So those are the things that I simply say when we're talking easily. I'm like, you know, that list of symptoms you gave me that I took notes on and just asked you all about, all of those are going to get worse if you Herx. So let's not do that. Let's really work on those detox and drainage pathways. Like you said, if you can fix the bucket, empty it out a little bit, that one drop of biocidin won't set you off. And I've seen that more times than I can count. Like, oops, okay, we need to go back. Let's add some more lymphatic support. Let's do a coffee enema. Let's do an infrared sauna. Keep adding more and more tools until we're able to do it. One little secret. Sometimes one drop will hurt you when one dropper won't. All right. Do you use muscle testing over lab testing to help guide your treatment?
I use a combination. What about you?
Definitely a combination. So I take in your symptoms, what your history is, your lab work, and I can use muscle testing. And I combine all that information together to allow me to understand a direction I need to go. It's the more I have in combination of information, the better I'm going to be able to help you.
Right. I agree. So for example, let's say someone comes to me and we know through frequency testing, there's millions of things in the world that could pop up. You know, I test the most common and frequent things that are root causes, but your body will attract to various solutions. But let's say you come to me and you're like, hey, I'm really dealing with XYZ. Well, then that's a sign, that's a symptom that had you not told me that, I wouldn't be guided to a direction of testing something. So I feel like it's so important to see every part of it. Someone might not know that they're vitamin D deficient, and a lab work can show us, hey, we're at 23 on vitamin D. We definitely need to probably figure out why this is the way it is. Or if we see elevations in some of the red blood cell markers like MCV, MCH, is there an issue with genetic SNPs? Do we need something like a methylation support or B12 folate? Because if there isn't an iron problem, maybe it's a B12 folate problem. And so your signs and symptoms, lab work, and muscle testing can just kind of overarching everything together provide a lot of information.
Yeah. Well, and then we add to this another question. What happens when a young person is withholding poop? How do I make them go to the bathroom? And since I'm the one working with kids a little more, I guess I'll take this. And the answer would be you give them more. So you're giving a half a cap of aloe, maybe add a bowel mover in, maybe give a full 2 caps. But at times it's a little bit different. So I add a little Tudka, because Tudka can help the bowels move also. I have had a few kids that are afraid to go to the bathroom, and I'll just start doing a little bit of drainage work. And it seems like that little bit of drainage work helps to relieve some stress on the brain. And then the kid will allow the bathroom to happen. So I've definitely heard this before, definitely stepped over into the drainage, not too fast because I don't want to be pushing a lot of drainage into a bowel that's not moving. But sometimes you got to relieve a little stress from the brain to get a kid to go, because they will withhold because they're afraid of doing it.
Right.
All right. How do you evaluate people 50 plus years old for lead exposure, especially since it's been stored in their bones and tissues for a long time? Hair mineral analysis?
You use HTMA, I feel like, a lot often and more often than I do. This is where I rely on frequency testing.
Yes, that's definitely a very valuable one. But since tonight's about labs, I was going with the lab. Yes, muscle testing, frequency testing is definitely going to be a good way. But if I had to use a lab source, it's going to be a hair tissue mineral analysis. And we're probably going to have to do some kind of provocative test because it is buried deep in the tissue. So you're going to need to be taking something like glutathione or some kind of binder, something to push it out for a couple of months before that test is even going to show anything. And oftentimes it takes several months to really push that stuff out for the really chronically ill. But during that period of time that you're pushing everything out, if you're not doing it with a purpose more than just pushing it out, then it's circulating and it's going to make you sick. Because blood testing for embedded lead is not going to work.
Right, I agree. Biotoxin binder, HMET for a few months, start pulling that out.
You know, this might be a good one for you, Emily, that I am not as familiar with, and this is a hormone situation, I'm guessing. My 4-year-old is getting lots of dark hair growth on her legs. Why?
Typically when that happens, there's excess androgens and testosterone in the system. So, that dark hair growth, and if it's even at that young of an age, sometimes as they get older, it begins to develop on the chin. It begins to develop in places that's not meant to be where females should grow hair. So why does testosterone and excess androgens, like why are they in excess? There's a few things I think about: inflammation and blood sugar dysregulation. Because females, your daughter, we don't have testosterone factories in our body. And so testosterone, though it's very blood sugar balancing, we don't make it. But here's the caveat: like, our bodies are really smart. They will place cysts on various organs and systems in the body, like the ovaries, for example. Those are able to then produce testosterone. So then you have this excess testosterone floating in a female body, leading to dark hair growth and excess androgens in the system, which leads to, male pattern hair loss and hair growth in places you don't like, cystic acne down the road, and just this influx of excess hormones that can't be turned off or eliminated.
Perfectly said, per usual. Lyme, mold, can they be the culprit of thyroid issues? Absolutely. I run labs all the time on there, and you can watch as those things go away, your thyroid gets better and better. If so, is it harmful to be on a thyroid med while you're going through that? I don't believe it's harmful. Sometimes it's necessary because you need to keep your metabolism up, because without a metabolism, you don't go to the bathroom. If you're not going to the bathroom, we're not cleaning out. So we've got to get your thyroid at least on a basic level before we even get into the detox and drainage too heavily. And then as we work through that, you can reduce your thyroid down, 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 leading to getting off of the medication in many cases. And we just have to work with a provider that prescribed that medication to you. In my office, we have a nurse practitioner, so I can actually do that with her, working you down very slowly until you're just off of it.
Yeah, I agree. Usually when I do frequency work and work with a lot of women with Hashimoto's, probably not around the 10 to 12 week mark is when we even begin messing with that medication.
Oh man, we've got questions flowing in faster than we're ever going to be answering these. We'll keep going for a couple more minutes and maybe a little bit of rapid fire. If your questions aren't there, then we're not going to be able to get to them tonight. We got to cut it off at some point because we could go all night long. Next question is family high cholesterol and triglycerides, and this caused her pancreatitis in May due to it. Why? I'll dive in a little bit on this. Yes, there are genes for cholesterol. More often than not, there are behaviors, habits, and infections that are passed throughout a family. And if you can address those things, that cholesterol gets back within a normal. So is it a thyroid issue? Is it a toxin issue? Is it an infection issue? Did mom pass it on to the kids or grandma to the kids, to her kids? Is it something in the way that you eat? That's 90% of the time what I find, not some sort of genetically high issue. Even though they tell you it's genetically high, look at all those other issues. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, there's rare situations where like MTHFR can cause elevations, but then you add in something like homocysteine supreme or methylation support, and it can help. But oftentimes it is an infection or virus that was passed down from family member to family member, for sure.
Okay. 4-year-old autistic, gaps since 9 months, no sugar, carbs. Why do we still have yeast signs? Laughing randomly. I'm going to go back to that quick answer of Candida is not from sugar and carbs alone. It will continually be there as long as you have parasites, metal, or medication that leaves it there. So the GAPS diet, no sugar, amazing start. It's just not the solution in the end. You've got to get to those other things first. I would love to tell you that diets are going to solve those problems. They just simply aren't enough. Yes, we will definitely be saving this. You're a student as an acupuncturist and would love to learn labs. Well, you know, there's a lot of places we go to learn labs. One of my favorites is Apex Energetics. They do a great great teaching. Like I said, Emily and I are putting together some lab coaching. What would you call that? Online
Master's program.
There you go, master's program. I don't know when that'll happen, be put out, but we're working on it. Do we have different detox symptoms depending upon what you're detoxing? Yeah, metal and mold would be different, and parasites different than that.
People often taste metal in the mouth when they're detoxing metals. Mold, your sweat kind of smells like mold. Have a lot of brain fog.
Okay. All right, everybody. That is 48 minutes online here. We are going to call it a day. I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question. Shoot them over to me and we'll get them answered for you. And I hope you guys enjoyed Emily. Emily, how can they find you and where can they find you at if they need help?
Yeah, so I'm pretty much only on Instagram. Jaban has this super cool Facebook group. I'm not in the Facebook Cool Kids crew, literally just on Instagram. It's my only place. So just my name, Emily Morrow. You'll see me. There's like a little butterfly. I go by M, and that's where I'm at.
And you'll know it because if you click on her name and you hear her speak, the Texas accent, it's great.
Yeah.
Always give her a hard time for that, although she can't hear it.
I don't have one. Back me up, guys.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on here. I know we're going to do more stuff again. We might even be going over to Instagram real quick because we started it and then jumped off because we were having a little bit of an echo, and we're both guilty for not being able to talk to everybody that's only on there. Some people only have that. So yeah, thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a great rest of your night. Bye.